The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
And now, The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. The clock's moved back here in the UK, so we're off and running a little earlier than usual. Nothing changes for those of you in North America, however, so you weren't hurrying to get up here like my producers were 8 minutes ago, forgetting that we were going an hour earlier, but I'm thankful at least that I was aware of it going into today, but I still feel a bit unprepared, even though I got up a little bit earlier. Just a lot to try to process, as is typical for a Monday program. Coming up on today's show, in the second segment, we're going to be looking at the speech that shocked America and Britain. I'm referring to the message Alexander Solzhenitsyn gave. I believe it was at Harvard back in 1978. And the reason we featured this in the Trumpet, my father did back in 1998. And the reason we're bringing it to your attention today is because there was another magazine that's basically just looked at some of the events of this year, 2020, and has hearkened back to this speech and has noted how that this speech really is, it's applicable to today. He's using Solzhenitsyn's words from way back in 1978 and then saying, look at our problems today. Well, the Trumpet, as usual, tomorrow's news today, way ahead of its time. As I say, we drew attention to this back in 1998, so we'll get into that a little bit more in the second segment. After we finished the program on Friday, there was an announcement. This seems like old news anytime you're going back to something that happened 3 days ago. But in any event, it was another big announcement coming from the Trump administration, another peace deal between Israel and this time Sudan. Here's a little bit from the president's announcement on Friday, clip 5.
The State of Israel and the Republic of Sudan have agreed to make peace. This is for many, many years they've been at odds, to put it nicely, and to normalize their relations. This will be the third country where we're doing this, and we have many, many more coming. This historic deal comes just a few weeks after the groundbreaking agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Israel and Bahrain. 3 months ago, no one thought this would be possible. Even Bibi didn't know if this was going to be possible, Bibi, right? But now multiple Arab countries across two continents have made peace with Israel. And again, we have many lined up. They want to come in. They want to get the deal done. They all see it. No blood in the sand. I say no blood. A number of months, everybody's going to be in this deal. And it's the way it should have been done a long time ago. We did it the opposite way, exactly the opposite way, and we took a lot of abuse from the people that were unable to make a deal for 40 years.
For 40 years, they tried to make a deal, and here, this has happened. These three nations, these three enemies of Israel, now at peace with Israel just in the last couple of months. And you can see why he's out there trumpeting his own horn. He has to. I saw some media reports where they said, well, this is President Trump's claiming that this is a victory for his administration. The press, they're not on board with it. In the midst of his statement there, Sam was telling me that he also announced that there hasn't been a combat death in Afghanistan since February. So here, we're not engaging in all these wars. There's no blood in the sand. Not since February. That's, again, we understand where everything is headed because of Bible prophecy. But just looking at it humanly, looking at it as an American, looking at it as an American journalist, where is the praise? Where is the support? You don't hear about it. You just don't hear about it. Instead, you hear 25,000 lies and counting. We can't even keep track of them. And they refuse to look at the actions. They look at the tweets, but they won't look at the fruits. 40 years of failure, as he noted there at the end of that little montage. Listen to what President Obama's Secretary of State, this was John Kerry, just a few years ago. Clip 6.
There will be no separate peace between Israel and the Arab world. I want to make that very clear to all of you. I've heard several prominent politicians in Israel sometimes saying, well, the Arab world's in a different place now. We just have to reach out to them and we can work some things with the Arab world and we'll deal with the Palestinians. No, 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 and no. There will be no advance and separate peace with the Arab world without the Palestinian process and Palestinian peace. Everybody needs to understand that. That is a hard reality.
Now, he turned out to be spectacularly wrong. Wrong. That's the Obama administration. And before him, I mean, President Trump said it wasn't just the last 8 years before he came along. But everything had to flow through the Palestinians, the Palestinian peace process. And what strikes me about that last quote you heard there is just the arrogance. So sure, there will be no separate peace with any nation. It is going to flow through the Palestinians, or there's nothing. And here comes a new administration. They take a different approach. And they've had 3 victories in the last couple months. 3 victories. You'd never know it, as I say, judging by the press coverage. But still, one victory after another. And yet the media, as always, is there to carefully frame everything in just such a way where it makes this particular administration look evil and deceitful. And of course, the previous one was worshipped. Byron York had a piece at the Washington Examiner about these big rallies that the groups of people in cars, boats. Of course, you know about the rallies that he speaks at, and you can get a pretty good idea just from the way that, well, the crowd behind him, I guess. But even there, the president just continually tells the cameras in the back, look, you should turn around, point your cameras at the crowd. There's thousands here. There's thousands out on the road trying to get in. Byron York says, I can't believe there aren't any news people here, said Linda of Greene County, Pennsylvania, as she stood among hundreds of cars and pickup trucks idling in long parallel lines in a vast big box store parking lot on Saturday. This is just over the weekend, waiting to join the Interstate 70 Trump train. Did you hear about this? Probably not. The Interstate 70 Trump train. It says, indeed, although there were carloads of Trump supporters as far as one could see, and many more on the way from Ohio and West Virginia, and this enormous political event was happening less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, as far as I could tell, writes Byron York, I was the only news person there. As far as I could tell, I was the only one. And Byron York says it was the biggest political rally no one saw. So you see, yet again, that what we see, what we read in the news, what we see on the news channels, for the most part, it's what the Democrat media complex wants us to see. It's what they want you to see. Notice what President Trump said last night. This was at his campaign rally in Manchester, New Hampshire, clip 1.
And I wish those cameras would show behind the cameras. There are thousands of people there, and thousands of people outside on the street. And you see what we go through. It's a tough thing. The swamp is deep and it's vicious. These people are vicious. These people don't report the truth. It's very hard. They don't report the truth. So, for instance, I asked them, would you please turn the cameras around? They don't do that. They never do. They have this shot all the time. I don't have that big an ego. I don't want that shot. They have this shot. You know what they show? They show myself and about 5 people back there.
Well, there's a few more than 5, but still, he makes a good point. And really, there's a larger point to be made from that. Everything is carefully framed. If you took away the media and the polling, the polls say this. The polls say Biden's up 12, he's up 14, he's up 18. If you were to strip all of that away and just judge it by what you're seeing happen, the Interstate 70 train, the Trump train as it's called, the boat parades, the tens of thousands that show up. If you just judged by what you were seeing, who would you say is the front runner? Who would you say has the best chance of winning the presidential election next week? Byron York says here, and gatherings like it have been happening for months. In some of the places President Trump needs most to win if he's to be reelected. And remarkably, the rallies are not the work of the Trump campaign. The road rally in Washington, Pennsylvania, was organized and staged by local Trump supporters, linked together largely by Facebook. So you have the rioting that's organized by Facebook, and the cameras are right there to follow it everywhere, and then to tell you it's mostly peaceful. You have this organization, or this rally, organized not by the Trump administration at all, just by ordinary Americans. And so far as Byron York can tell, he is the only journalist there to even cover it, to even talk about it. It says, he's speaking of some of the people that gathered there, they feel so strongly about Trump because they know he has supported their industry, while Obama and his vice president, Joe Biden, wanted to cripple and ultimately eliminate. He's talking about the energy industry. And this is big for voters in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, in Michigan, the Rust Belt. It says here, they know Trump has not miraculously saved the energy industry in Pennsylvania. They didn't expect that he would. Their calculus was much more basic. In 2016, they voted for the candidate who would stop trying to kill the industry that supports 322,000 jobs in Pennsylvania. And you can see why, following the debate last week, Joe Biden's been backtracking. His statements about fracking, his statements about the oil industry. He's been backtracking. His campaign's been out there backtracking because they know they're losing voters. But what do the polls say? The polls say he's winning by a landslide margin. It says now they know President Joe Biden would resume the green crusade to destroy the oil and gas business. See, that's the reality. Those are the facts on the ground. That's what's happening. These people are concerned. President Trump says, no, we're energy independent. We're going to allow for fracking. We're going to build pipelines. We're going to do whatever we need to. And then the other side, well, they've got a lot of pressure coming from the radical left, from the Green New Deal and such. So, the Biden people, they're in between a rock and a hard place for sure. But just looking at what you see, at what's happening on the ground, whether it's here in the United States or in the Middle East. Speaking of the rallies, this was an independent journalist who put together some bits on a rally that the president recently had in Arizona. Clip 2.
At least 6,000 patriots cheered on President Trump at his recent rally in Tucson. He began speaking at around 4 in the afternoon, but the line for the shuttle bus ride to the event began forming at 6 in the morning.
4 more years! 4 more years!
Tucson Tower Air Force One, we are on final approach.
That announcement electrified the crowd, and when the president took the stage, a sea of cell phones captured a moment they'll never forget.
That I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free.
Some images there that convey a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. That's an independent journalist showing you. He's out there in the bus, the shuttle bus. He's out there in the lines of people. He's at the rally itself. And then the rest of his report, he's just interviewing one family after another. Why are you here? What's important to you? What issues are you really concerned about? And it's interesting to watch. You can get a pretty good feel for what some ordinary Americans are thinking. Now, compare it, again, with what you get in the major media, the mob media, the media mob that hates this president and everything that he stands for. This is Brian Stelter on CNN yesterday, clip 3.
But he's not really fighting the media on this one. He's resisting reality. He's trying to make up his own reality, which is really the central story of the Trump years ever since Inauguration Day. Another day, another distraction. But the polls show that reality is winning. Reality is winning.
That's CNN yesterday saying President Trump's out there saying one thing, but what is the reality? The reality is that Joe Biden's winning, and he's winning by a mile. He's miles out in front. 12%, 14%, 18%. Listen to this exchange. This is also with Brian Stelter, but he's got John Harris from Politico on about an article that he wrote evidently last week, clip 4.
John, you have a headline for Politico that, to me, this is the most interesting story I read all week. It's at Politico.com. It's headlined, "Trump is doing worse than it seems, but reporters are afraid to say so." You and Daniel Littman argue that by historical standards, Trump's coverage is actually favorable in one key aspect. What is that key aspect?
The fact that reporters are giving generous allowance that Trump could still win.
The fact that reporters are giving generous allowance that Trump could still win. How in the world could the major media reporting, this man says, and Brian Stelter, I mean, this is the most important article of the week. The article that says he has no chance of winning. And why are reporters saying he even has a chance? This is what passes for objective reporting. Actually, you know, Brian, the coverage has been too favorable. Really? He went on to say that the reporting, that is, they're treating it as if this is a close race. They're treating this as if Donald Trump could win. And he went on to say that, you know, in 2016, we were kind of caught by surprise. So that's kind of impacted the way some of the coverage is coming down this time. Stelter wants it to be more emphatic. Look, the reality is he has no chance of winning. There is no chance that he's going to win this. And you just think about some of those statements that we've repeated over and again. My father talking about God intervening, upsetting their plan, and so on. This was from the 2019 trumpet in January, talking about how the radicals want to control the courts. This was following the Kavanaugh circus. My father said, "I believe Mr. Kavanaugh's confirmation indicates God will likely see that President Trump has a second term. God will likely see to that." So we'll look at what's happening in front of our eyes over this next week and also consider what God's prophecies have to say. It is hard to keep up with. And through it all, you have this carefully staged and framed narrative of deceit, of lies, an alternate reality. the way that these radicals in the leftist media see it. I played a clip from that Leslie Stahl interview with the president, the unedited clip that the president released on, I believe it was Thursday night, maybe. And the edited version, the CBS version, that aired last night. And just to repeat again, and you heard some of these words on Friday's program, but this time around you get to see Leslie Stahl's face as she's confronted about what should obviously be scandalous. And she says, basically, oh, no, there's no truth to that. Here's clip 7.
You know, this is 60 Minutes. And we can't put on things we can't verify.
You won't put it on because it's bad for Biden.
We can't put on things we can't verify.
Leslie, they spied on my campaign.
Well, we can't verify
It's been totally verified.
No.
It's been, just go down and get the papers. They spied on my campaign, they got caught.
No.
And then they went much further than that, and they got caught. And you will see that, Leslie, and you know that, but you just don't want to put it on the air.
As a matter of fact, I don't know that.
Okay.
No, she says over and again, no, it can't be verified. No, you're wrong. You're wrong, President Trump. They didn't spy on you. They didn't. Maybe they don't come out and say they absolutely didn't, but then they won't come out and say that they did. It can't be verified, so we're not going to report it. Now, you look at that scandal with the Biden family. Same thing. We're not going to report this because it can't be verified. Or more than that, it's Russian disinformation. Joe Biden had his segment on 60 Minutes last night, and he was given an opportunity to comment on the laptop scandal and all of his family's business dealings abroad. And here's what he had to say, clip 8.
Do you believe the recent leak of material allegedly from Hunter's computer is part of a Russian disinformation campaign?
From what I've read and know, the intelligence community warned the president that Giuliani was being fed disinformation from the Russians. And we also know that Putin is trying very hard to spread disinformation about Joe Biden. And so when you put the combination of Russia, Giuliani, the president together, it's just what it is. It's a smear campaign because he has nothing he wants to talk about. What is he running on? What is he running on?
That's Joe Biden last night. The journalist, of course, is there saying, allegedly, Hunter's laptop. John Ratcliffe has already said, there's no Russian disinformation here. But there's the journalist helping him, coaching him. And then Joe Biden now, that's their position, I guess, as I was covering on Friday's show. You put Putin together with Giuliani and the president, and it's obviously disinformation. There was an article over the weekend at the Washington Post about the Hunter Biden laptop, and it was following basically the president's comments from the debate last Thursday night, where the president said, "Are you serious? You're seriously calling this Russia again? Just like the hoax of 2016?" And so the Washington Post, it comes out with its story, its position. This is the position that the Post now takes. We'll comment on the story, but only in such a way. It has to be carefully framed, just like that camera at a Trump rally. Carefully framed. And here's the money quote. He says, "We must treat the Hunter Biden leaks as if they were a foreign intelligence operation, even if they probably aren't." That's the Washington Post on Saturday. We have to treat this story as if it's a foreign intelligence operation, even if it probably isn't. That's one of the most influential newspapers in the United States. And if you can follow the twisted logic here, going back over the last several years, basically the position for them has been, we cannot report on the contents of the laptop. We cannot report on the scandalous dealings with Ukraine, China, Russia, because, well, it can't be verified. We can, on the other hand, and should report that this is a foreign intel operation, even if it probably isn't. That's exactly what they're saying. The Washington Post. The Washington Examiner, just to switch gears here for a second, says here, after the first report on Hunter Biden's laptop dropped last week, a number of high-profile journalists moved immediately to disprove it, alleging without a shred of evidence a Kremlin conspiracy. So they have not one shred of evidence. You talk about not being verified, and yet they are running with this. Russian disinformation. You heard the journalist there. And then Joe Biden chimes in. Not a shred of evidence. And yet that's the narrative now. And they are running with it. It says that Democratic officials and intelligence community has-beens allege the same is likely more than a coincidence. CNN's Marshall Cohen said the alleged emails underpinning the New York Post stories may be part of a Russian disinformation campaign. And then this is the Washington Examiner. Listen to this. Have you ever seen so many people in the journalism business work so hard to dispute a news report? You would think there would be an equal amount of effort from the press to verify the content and context of emails whose authenticity Biden has not disputed. But you would be wrong. No, the content, what's on the laptop, what's in the emails, and then you have the other business partner that came forward last week with his emails, all connected. Instead of piecing the dots together or connecting the dots, they're often running with a foreign intel operation. Russian disinformation. So this Washington Post article, which says that we've got to treat these leaks like a foreign intelligence operation, even if they probably aren't. It sets up some of the details of this story. It talks about what happened or the exchange at the debate Thursday night. And then it says this, just to give you some context in that quote I gave you a minute ago. A close look at the evidence shows that neither Biden nor Trump have the facts on their side for now. Take a step back, and the Russian interference of 2016 holds valuable lessons on what to do and what not to do in 2020. We must treat the Hunter Biden leaks as if they were foreign intelligence, even if they probably are not. So that's the Washington Post, and everyone's running with it, of course, this week. But what a statement. So it's will worship, like Colossians 2 says. This is right out of the mind of the devil. Look, we've got it. The narrative has to be framed just like this, even if it's not true. Even if it's not true, this is what we have to say. And they're saying it. Now, speaking of 2016, how did the Washington Post deal with the dubious Russian intel coming from a British spy that was paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign? Because that was wall-to-wall coverage for 4 years. And you know, when it says in this article, it's comparing 2016 to 2020, when it talks about Russian disinformation, it's not even talking about the hoax. The coup attempt. They won't even go back and look at that and say, hey, let's learn some lessons from that because, we got it flat wrong. No, they're going back to 2016 and the hack on the DNC server. What can we learn from this? Because that was obviously a Russian attack, which it hasn't even been proven to be. I'll get into the crowd strike here in a second. I'm running out of time, I can see. Let me just move forward in this Washington Post piece. It gives some of the history. Hunter Biden dropping off the laptop, or supposedly Hunter Biden, and someone that signed Hunter Biden's signature, drops off his laptop in April of 2019. You know the story. He never picks it up. The owner confiscates it or keeps it after months of trying to get a hold of the owner, and then turns it over to the FBI, and then gives a copy of the hard drive to an attorney who works for Rudy Giuliani. It says here, this is from Washington Post, then on October 14th, files purportedly from the mysterious laptop spilled into public view in the New York Post. My Signal messaging app, this is the Washington Post author, I didn't write down his name. My Signal messaging app immediately lit up with keen observers suspecting that this was finally it, the long-expected Russian hack and leak operation. See, they were expecting it. So when it comes in the form of the New York Post and Giuliani's involved, the president, you know Putin wants Biden. And so, well, it's obvious. We've been waiting for this. We have been waiting for the attack. A rerun of 2016 surfaced via a computer repair shop and the Post in lieu of Guccifer 2.0 and WikiLeaks. See, it's a little bit different this time around, but it's just like the Russian attack on the DNC server. And then he goes to, again, well, let me just set this up because I'll get to the CrowdStrike bit here in a second. He says, first, in 2016, he's comparing the two time periods, the two attacks, the two Russian disinformation attacks. First, in 2016, we had meaningful forensics artifacts on day one to show traces of the hack. In 2020, we have no meaningful evidence. The cybersecurity research community immediately knew with a good degree of confidence what was going on in 2016, literally on the day the Democratic National Committee hacked, the day of it, and then the first leaks resulting from it became public. So he's operating on the assumption that the DNC was hacked by the Russians. And you know how that we know that? The DNC told us that. The DNC, they said we were hacked by Russians. And this was sort of, was sort of what got the whole Russian hoax off and running, which, as I say, wall-to-wall coverage in 2016. This is from Julie Kelly's piece at American Greatness. It's from last year about this time. We went through this, I think, a year ago, some on the program. But it says one of the animating chapters in the Trump-Russian collusion saga was the claim that Russia infiltrated the Democratic National Committee's email server in the spring of 2016. That hack, according to collusion truthers, and the subsequent release of damaging emails exchanged between top Democratic Party officials was central to Vladimir Putin's scheme to sway the presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. So it all started with this hack on the DNC. You know, and then the Democrats will point to Donald Trump out on the campaign trail saying, oh, you know, Putin should look into Hillary's emails. It says here, but the evidence to support this widely accepted claim is sketchy as best and appears to be under appropriate scrutiny by prosecutors now examining the origins of the FBI's pre-election investigation into the Trump campaign for colluding with Russia. And then she talks about CrowdStrike and how that this is the company the DNC brought in. If you remember, they brought in CrowdStrike to examine the servers and then to give their assessment. And then the FBI under Jim Comey, when he comes in and says, well, can we look at the servers? The DNC said no to the FBI. We're doing this. We're taking care of this privately. We're investigating this internally. The FBI, listen to this, hacked by the Russians. And they just said to the FBI, no can do. We don't want you involved in this. And the FBI under Comey said, well, okay, I guess that's fine. I guess that's okay. Julie Kelly says, CrowdStrike, this was the company they hired, the DNC. CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity firm with strong ties to the Democratic Party. After the DNC server was hacked in early 2016, Perkins Coie, a politically connected law firm, hired CrowdStrike on behalf of the DNC to find out who was behind the intrusion. Perkins Coie is the same law firm that hired Fusion GPS on behalf of the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign to dig up Russian-related dirt on Team Trump before the election. That would be what culminated in the Steele dossier, the infamous Steele dossier. Russian intel brought to us by a British spy, paid for by Hillary Clinton, and wall-to-wall coverage in the Washington Post for years. For years. Now back to this Washington Post piece. It says further on, second, 2016 disinformation was a surprise. In 2020, it was expected. Most journalists and media organizations reporting on the Hunter Biden leak initially focused on the disinformation, not the content of the leaked files. It helped for sure that the contents were not nearly as scandalous and revealing as initially and falsely reported. So here's the Post. Among other things, it's saying, some of the things the New York Post said was scandalous, and that Donald Trump has been on the campaign trail saying this. They've been caught red-handed. These people are corrupt. Here's the Washington Post saying, you know what? Even what we've kind of seen on the laptop, there's nothing much to it. Well, so then why the censorship? Why have they tried to blot it out? Why did they shut down the New York Post Twitter account? It's still closed. It's been closed for 10 days, 11 days. It says here, social media companies were also ready. Facebook and Twitter had cooperated in several instances with the FBI to take down smaller disinformation campaigns already this year, and we're expecting more to come. It says the social media companies immediately demoted or entirely prevented the Post story from being shared on their platforms. And this is something that the Post and other major media sources, they're quite happy about. Yeah. Shut down the Twitter account. Shut it down. CNN ran this story just this weekend. A right-wing offensive is underway to discredit social media companies just days before the election. That's the problem, the way CNN sees it. They're out there on the offensive to discredit social media companies, and social media companies, meanwhile, are shutting down the story. They're censoring it. And they have no problem. The major media, the radical left, has no problem with that. The fourth leading newspaper in the United States in terms of circulation. And they can't even get into their Twitter account. Eli Lake tweeted out, "It's an outrage that the New York Post is still locked, and it's a disgrace that more journalists are not outraged by this." You see, when it veers out of the frame to something that the journalists don't like, they're A-okay with censorship. That's fine. That's fine. The New York Post, it's a tabloid. It's a tabloid. It needs to be shut down. It can't be tweeting out these kinds of stories. It might hurt Joe Biden, after all. Further on in this Washington Post piece, it says, finally, the FBI and U.S. intelligence also learned their lessons from 2016 and James Comey's errors. Don't get both hands into the political meat grinder weeks before a general election. The exception in 2020 was DNI John Ratcliffe, who claimed this October 19th, that Hunter Biden's laptop is not part of some Russian disinformation campaign. See, for him, it's just a claim. You can't really take what the director of DNI or the director of national intelligence has to say. He can't be trusted. He's appointed by Donald Trump, after all. The next day, the FBI, in a carefully worded letter, said it had nothing to add at this time to Ratcliffe's statement. Meanwhile, listen to this, more than 50 former U.S. intelligence officials signed a letter stating that the New York Post story had, quote, all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation. The Post says the list of ex-intelligence officials included several directors and deputy directors of the CIA and the National Security. Oh, these are bigwigs. These are important people. The Post says the group, however, added that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement. We don't have evidence, but this has all the earmarks. And they got 50 signatures. And guess which signatures are right at the very top? James Clapper, John Brennan, Leon Panetta, Michael Hayden. These are all the deep state in the Obama era. They have no evidence. In other words, it's not verified, but they're just giving their opinion that it's Russian disinformation. So if that story is unverified, that's fine. Run with it. Run as far as you can go with it. But you listen to Leslie Stahl there and looking at the president with disdain. Now, he was talking about the spying part of it, but she was the same way when he brought up the Biden scandal. How could, look, we are 60 Minutes, okay? We're 60 Minutes, President Trump. And we're not just going to talk about something that hasn't been verified. Even as they say, it's all Russian disinformation. The laptop that Hunter Biden or someone that looks like him dropped off at that computer repair shop. And the contents, the press, they could be, well, it's just, they're utterly disinterested in what's there. The Washington Post says, indeed, there are good reasons to be skeptical of the theory that the laptop is a foreign plot. So here's the Washington Post. What was the money quote? Look, we've got to go with this narrative, even if it's probably not true, okay? Even if it's probably not true. Indeed, there are good reasons to be skeptical of the theory that the laptop is a foreign plot. If a competent Russian intelligence agency went to the length of procuring hacked material, blending it with forgeries, perhaps researching a suitable surfacing locale and set up in Wilmington, and surfacing the package in a human intelligence operation that required careful planning, then it's highly likely that agency would have found, or more likely forged, files that would have actual political impact instead of the unremarkable material revealed in the Post so far. It's probably not Russian disinformation, but we've got to go with that narrative anyway. And oh, by the way, even if you don't believe that narrative, you know, the revelations, they aren't really that remarkable anyway. That's the Washington Post. It's a non-story. That's why Twitter is censoring it. That's why Facebook put on the bans. That's why these social media sites took all of these unprecedented actions, because it's really a big nothing burger. Is that true? They are blotting it out because they know how harmful it is. They are blotting it out because they know. They know it's the truth. They know it represents a mountain of evidence. And so they don't want you to see it. The frame has to zoom in on this figure and maybe five or six people behind him, and that's it. That's it. You don't widen the shot. You certainly don't pan to the left or pan to the right. You certainly don't turn it around and see what's behind. It's Russian disinformation. That's all you need to know. The Washington Post says, I'm bringing it here to the end, it says, nevertheless, in the likely continued absence of certainty either way, the Biden leaks deserve the full potential disinformation treatment. It deserves that. It's a different disinformation campaign, even if it's probably not. That's the Washington Post 2020. It says here, well, let me skip ahead to this piece by Matt Taibbi. He says the incredible decision by Twitter and Facebook to block access to the New York Post story about a cache of emails reportedly belonging to Democratic nominee Joe Biden's son Hunter, with Twitter going so far as to lock the 200-year-old newspaper out of its own account for over a week, continues to be a major underreported scandal. I mean, the point that Matt's making here is that the real story in his mind, I mean, we would say they're both stories, but more than the Biden scandal is the censorship scandal. An underreported scandal. Taibbi says the hypocrisy is mind-boggling. Imagine the reaction if the same set of facts involved the New York Times and any of its multitudinous, unverifiable exposés from the last half-decade. From the similarly leaked Black Ledger story implicating Paul Manafort to its later debunked repeated contacts with Russian intelligence story, to its mountain of articles about the far more dubious Steele dossier, Internet platforms for years have balked at intervening at many other sensational, unverified stories, including ones called into question in very short order. These platforms, they just put it out there. It doesn't matter if it's verified or not. Hey, we're just a platform, they would say. But now they're police. They're the platform and the police. Now they want control. If it hurts their candidate. This says here, as has been hinted at by several prominent journalists, controversies erupted within newsrooms across New York and Washington in the last week. Editors have been telling charges that any effort to determine whether or not the Biden laptop material is true or to ask the Biden campaign to confirm or deny the story will either not be allowed or put through heightened fact-checking procedures. On the other hand, if you want to assert without any evidence at all that the New York Post story is Russian interference, you can essentially go straight to print. He says finally, the suppression story is almost certainly a bigger scandal than the Hunter Biden affair itself, but it's all become part of the same picture. That's Matt Taibbi and his article on the suppression, the censorship, the bigger scandal than the actual story. Well, let's see what we can do with our last 9 minutes or so. Maybe we can take a short break and then come back and tidy things up. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Are we living in the last days? Some dismiss the notion as fanatical, but world leaders and news analysts are issuing warnings that are becoming more and more dire. Could Bible prophecies about the last days actually be accurate? Our brochure can help guide you through the relevant news and history and help you compare these events to what the Bible says. Are we living in the last days? This brochure is available for free right now at thetrumpet.com. From the Philadelphia Church of God campus in Edstone, England, this is the Trumpet Daily Program with Stephen Flurry.
So we'll have to condense some of the Solzhenitsyn content into these last few minutes, and I guess it could probably, I'll see how it goes this afternoon and tomorrow. It might be that we could spend a little bit of time on it on tomorrow's program as well. But I mentioned at the top the 1978 speech by the Russian poet Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and then my father's article about that in 1998, my father calling it the most condemning speech ever given on American soil. And my father said the West scorned his message. That negative reaction is proving to be a major disaster. That's my father's take. Now you jump forward to this year in this publication, Quillette, I guess is how you pronounce it. But the author here, Sergei Klannerman, I guess is his name, he's writing about some of the events of this year, 2020, and then referring back to the prescience of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, his speech at Harvard. Klannerman writes, rereading the speech today, in the fall of the horrible year 2020, I find it truly prophetic. He finds the Solzhenitsyn speech prophetic. Where have you heard this before? He says, it is now painfully clear that as Solzhenitsyn was able to discern 42 years ago, the West has been gradually losing the will and intellectual ability to defend itself, not so much against foreign armies, as it may have appeared in 1978, but against an army of internal critics determined to demolish everything the West used to stand for. The sickness from within, it's destroying us, he said. And Solzhenitsyn saw this coming. He delivered a strong warning back in 1978. And you can see why we drew attention to it in 1998, 20 years later. The headline at that Trumpet magazine, July of 1998, fulfilled prophecy from a Nobel Prize winner. Some of you old-timers will remember Solzhenitsyn on the cover with his hand gesturing in the air, giving his speech, or at least an image of him giving his speech. And now you look at this article from Quillette, and the author saying, it was basically, this is fulfilled prophecy coming from this Russian Nobel Prize winner. Time does fly, and I'm sure there's a lot from our younger generation that might not be familiar with Solzhenitsyn, but he played a huge role in exposing the evil and the corruption within the USSR and resisting the USSR. My father wrote in the Soviet Union, that is. My father wrote, many people believe that Solzhenitsyn did more to bring down the system than any other Russian. So he was a prominent figure in the 20th century. The Soviet Union, of course, collapsed just a few years after Herbert Armstrong's death back in 1986. Going back to the 1998 article, my father, he said, never has such a massively murderous government as the Soviet Union been so deeply exposed by one man, and the West agreed with his conclusions. See, there was a time when we would have held him up as a hero. He resisted against communism, and it spread. And then he comes over to our country and he says, that communist infiltration, it's here. It's spreading. And that wasn't received so well. It says it didn't end there. Solzhenitsyn also exposed America and Britain, and we've rejected almost 100% of his severe criticism. That should have made us do some serious thinking about being biased, but it didn't. Further on, my father said this. His Harvard speech sent shockwaves through the West. Most of the media turned bitterly against him. This is a chapter in our history that we desperately need to understand. See, it ties right in with what I was saying in the first segment. He comes over and says, look, your society is sick. You've drifted far from God. You've lost your courage. I'll get into that more tomorrow. And this is going to end badly for you. It's going to end in ruin. And the press, they weren't about to receive correction from him. They're not going to go back and look at 2016 and the Russia hoax and say honestly and humbly, what can we learn from this? Instead, they go back to the DNC hack and say, what can we learn from that? And even that's probably a big hoax. A setup, a lie to be used as a pretext to go after Donald Trump. Well, he's obviously in collusion. Who's really spearheading this mass disinformation? It's just all over the place. I'm not saying the Russians and the Chinese don't have their agents of deception. The Iranians and every nation does. But Solzhenitsyn was right. The worst of it's right in our midst. It's right in our own nations. And they're actively working. That's why I said last week that if you don't confront this and actually prosecute people and put them in jail, it's just going to keep spreading like cancer. It won't go away. Here comes this letter signed by all these top former intelligence officials, and right at the top, Brennan, Clapper, Panetta, and so on. They won't go away. They just keep coming back. And that's what my father has said about the devil, even when he has a setback because God upsets his plan. He doesn't give up. He keeps coming back. Well, I'll get into that Solzhenitsyn speech a little bit more tomorrow because there's some excellent information from my father's article and then this recent one from Quillette. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. We thank you for joining us on today's show, and we'll see you tomorrow.